Okay, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our first Open High Streets event of the year on behalf of the Architectural Heritage Fund. I'm Beverly Gormley and I'm the Programme Manager at the Heritage Trust Network, and we're the umbrella body for groups and organisations who are rescuing and restoring historic buildings, structures and places. Just got a few more to admit. There we go. Right, we're joined today by some absolutely fantastic speakers, I'm sure you'll agree. We've got Kelsey Wilson-Lee, who's Head of Programmes at the Architectural Heritage Fund. We've got Owen Lloyd-James, who's Head of Places Strategy at Historic England. We've got Anne Jenkins, who's the Director of Midlands and East at the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We've got Mick Mcgrath, who's Development Officer at Locality. And we've got Becky Jamieson, who's the Senior Relationship Manager at the Arts Council. And this event is all about funding. That's something that everybody is really interested in all the time, but especially at the moment. The changes in the funding landscape and what you need to do next as a group or as an organisation. It's the first Open High Streets event that we're running this year. And before we go any further into the event, I just want to pop up a quick poll just to start off, just to make sure everybody's listening, that you're all awake. And it's just asking your views on what you think about attending in-person events this year. So I'll just pop that up. It's a very quick poll. It's got 3 very short questions, so it shall only take a few seconds. Oh, I think, David, you might need to start the poll. It's not letting me do it because we're logged in as the same account.
Oh, right. Polling. Okay, that should be there. So yes, there are 3 questions. So please go through the 3 questions.
Brilliant.
In sequence.
Fabulous. It's something that we're all thinking about at the moment, putting together a programme of events for this year and trying to understand whether people want to attend in-person events from July, you know, whether they'll be using public transport, and really what your thoughts are. And if you've got any extra thoughts, please put them in the chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on that too.
I've just noticed on the poll that if you don't, you have to answer question 3, even though the question 3 says only if you said you won't attend. So just maybe put right. September if you are willing to attend.
Thanks, Kelsey. Can we pull up the results?
The votes are still coming in, so
right.
We'll give it. The numbers are still rising, so
giving it a lot of thought. It is an important subject.
So yes, and some people have only just joined the meeting. So yeah. If you've just joined the meeting, you should find a poll in front of you. Please complete it. There's 11 people who haven't completed it yet, so
you know who you are.
I'll just hang on until the number stops going up, and then I'll stop the poll.
Brilliant.
There wasn't an option for not sure.
No, we don't like fence sitters.
We did have this discussion. I'd originally put a not sure.
No, I think the idea is to get an impression of what your thinking is. So it's You know, it's not, we're not asking you to make a decision. We're just asking you to give us an impression of your thoughts at the moment. So I'm going to give it 10 more seconds, in which case it would have been up for 3 minutes, and then I'm going to stop.
That's a good point, Vicky. Attending events depends where they are and the cost of registration and of getting there. It's a big one.
Okay, you're out of time now. And here's the results. Which seem very evenly split.
Okay, we'll keep a record of those and we can share it with everyone. Right then, we'll carry on. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. I'm sure you've all used Zoom before, but just in case anybody hasn't used it before, please, if you could stay on mute. This is Zoom meeting, so people can unmute themselves quite easily, but just to make sure that, you know, the speakers are heard and there's no background interruptions, if you could stay on mute at least until the Q&A session at the end, that would be fantastic. If you do find that the video starts to get a little bit laggy or you can't hear people very well, it's best if you switch your camera off. It could be that your bandwidth's being eaten up by so many webcams showing. It's completely up to you, but if it starts to go a little bit dodgy, just try switching your camera off. That's bottom left where it says stop video according to what device you're using. If you see a little on top left of your screen, there's a strip that says we're live on Otter AI. This is a little piece of software that we've got to make our meetings and webinars much more accessible for people. And it's live speech to text transcript. So if there's anyone here who's hard of hearing and you want to see what's being said rather than hear what's being said, please click on that and give it a try. And we'd love to hear your feedback about it too, whether it works for you. Please use the chat button for chatting amongst yourselves, for asking the questions, for introducing yourselves. And I'll be keeping a record of any questions that go into the chat box, and we'll be posing them to the speakers at the end of the session. At that point, when we do get to the Q&A section, we'll go through those questions that have been posed first. And then if there are any more questions that you want to ask, if you could please use the raise your hand function in the reactions button at the bottom, or I think that's probably the best way because there's so many people here, it would be hard to keep an eye on if anybody's waving at the camera. So if you can at all use that raise hand feature, I'll be notified of it. That would be brilliant. The webinar is being recorded. So if you don't want to appear on it, please switch your camera off. It will be available on the Heritage Trust Network's website and on our YouTube channel as well, so that we can share it much more widely because it's such an interesting and important topic. So the only other thing I've got to say is if you want to change the view on Zoom, you go top right, click on view, and I would say the best thing to do is to choose speaker view so that you'll see the presentations and who's speaking at the same time. So without further ado, I will switch my camera off and I will hand over to Kelsey, who's going to kick us off. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you, Bev. And I just want to make sure everyone hopefully can hear me. Anybody nodding, those who have cameras on would be helpful. Thank you so much. Brilliant.
Can hear you.
If at any point I have been told sometimes if I sit back too far, my voice drops. So just turn your mic on and shout that you can't hear me if that happens. I'm the head of programs and impact at the Architectural Heritage Fund. I see many familiar faces and names in among you. So many of you may know us very well indeed. But for those who don't, I just wanted to give a very brief overview as to what we do as an organization, and also our particular kind of interest in high streets, which is one of the focuses that we're speaking about today. So I'm just going to share my screen briefly, and I hope you all will be able to, can you see this? I will now go into slideshow.
Yeah, we can see it.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us. We're the Architectural Heritage Fund. We've been going since 1976. Many of you may have had social investment lending from us over the years, loans for a variety of different purposes. For several decades now, we've also been providing grants, and that's really where myself and my team kind of focus on is the kind of grants provision. At all stages, we also kind of engage with advice, kind of bespoke advice, and of course are interested in supporting the sector to kind of continue to kind of grow in its capacity and skills. We really are focused on promoting the role of I guess what we sometimes call community heritage. So these are kind of historic buildings in towns and villages and cities all over the place, but not necessarily simply defining heritage as, as the grand buildings, but the quite kind of ordinary historic, in some cases ordinary historic buildings that nevertheless provide a lot of richness and kind of help contribute to what makes places unique and special and interesting. And we're very interested in promoting the ownership of these buildings by communities, by charities, social enterprises, and really kind of community uses. We work with in excess of 250 projects a year. I think last year it was in excess of 300, and we have a group of regionally based officers located around different parts of England. We are all kind of remote most of the time anyway. So we're all over the UK, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, all over England. And this just, when I say we're all over the UK, this is a map showing some of the sites that we funded over the years. You can see we're literally everywhere. So no matter where you are, there is a project that AHF has been supporting and engaged with over the years. We are, this is a kind of diagram that we like to use to demonstrate the kind of the way we engage with projects across the life cycle. We are predominantly, our grants have traditionally been quite focused on early stage support, those really critical early questions around, is this project viable? Is what you want to do with it going to work with that building? Can you get the funding sorted out? These are the kind of things that we're very keen to help you and you're developing your project with. And then also in project development, you need to get everything ready for building, everything from architectural drawings, fundraising plans. It can be quite varied what we can support in that regard. And then as the project moves forward, our ability to grant fund becomes more limited, except in a small number of specific situations, which I'll get back to. But we also have an additional support, which is our lending. And we do often provide loans for the purchase of buildings, for working capital if you need, you're going to go out for your fundraising strategy. But while you've got some funding, you want to get started, we can hopefully help provide some funding for that. And in some cases for some ongoing support, particularly during exceptional scenarios like we've been experiencing recently. So this just briefly goes through some of our main grants. So we have these early stage viability grants. It depends on which country you're in, how much funding we can offer, and also within England, it depends whether you're in a town centre or not. The funding that we have available is disparate. I'm afraid at the moment it's not uniform across the whole of the UK. Project development grants, again, basically, very many different disparate things that require funding to get to that kind of critical capital stage. So these kind of two areas really are the core of our grant work. Where we have activity. In England, we do have some additional funding opportunities, both for Crowdfunding grants, crowdfunding matching grants. This is in town centres and on high street projects. Any of you working in high street houses or probably ordinary houses, you know, that's something that you should be aware of. It is something, you know, we know that everyone's spoken quite a lot over the years about we have to get away from just pure grants. But it is true. Increasingly, there will not necessarily be enough grant income, pure grant income, to kind of take some of these projects to fruition. But actually, you know, things like crowdfunding have come a long way, and so we're very keen to promote crowdfunding. We think, as well as offering opportunities for funding, that these are actually really great ways for you to engage your local community with the project and really literally get their buy-in in a kind of meaningful way that has lots of disparate advantages beyond just the funds themselves. So we're keen to encourage that. And if anyone has any interest in reaching out to us about that, we'd be keen to talk to you. We do in England have a very small number of, and also in Wales, have a very small number of capital grants available. They will not be at the level that some of the larger funders will be able to support, but it is something that we are keen to do. We also are engaged with supporting the development of community shares programs. Again, this is about that community buy-in as well as about the funding. And we've been partnering with Co-ops UK to support a booster program, which we're very keen to encourage, particularly in England, where we have funding available to help invest ourselves some equity investments, as well as some funding to get you started if you're interested in developing a community shares offer for your project. So that's something to bear in mind. Lending, I mentioned as well, we do have a number, we have two separate lending funds. They have different, slightly different terms. They are both focused really on what I suppose is the AHF's core interest, which is that wonderful kind of juxtaposition between having a locally interesting and important historic building that we want to maintain and preserve and bring back into use, and a really strong social impact. So if you are, you know, trying to deliver an essential community service from a historic building, then by all means, please do reach out to us. You can find all of our contact details on the AHF website, which is, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, is ahfund.org.uk. In the last couple of very brief moments, I wanted to just show you some of the kind of work we have supported over the years. Some of you in the audience, I know these projects much better than I do. You know, this just shows you the kind of way that we engage with projects, and hopefully some of the diversity of the projects we're interested in engaging with. This is a historic house in Norwich, which has been supported both in its early development work via grants and also via a loan. The Norwich Preservation Trust is turning it around and converting it into, I believe, housing. So kind of that much, you know, kind of needed use, and a historic building that can provide it. This is a project being led by Valley Heritage, one of our heritage development trusts, which if you're interested in, I would encourage you to have a look on our website about that. Valley Heritage have purchased through a loan and then have been restoring through a capital grant this historic, wonderful kind of Scotch baronial turreted historic bank in the town of Bacup in the Rossendale Valley in Lancashire. And this project is being converted into community workspaces and also some housing for young people at risk of homelessness. So again, a really strong community community-based social impact, and really led by the community. It's a great project we're very keen on. In Scotland, we've got a project with at Edinburgh Printmakers, where we've had a number of different viability development work, loan funding, You can see also, you know, the timescales involved in these projects. These are not overnight. We recognize that, and we want to kind of help you as you're developing all along the way. That's all I have to say, other than to thank our funders that make our funding possible. We have a mix of charitable, philanthropic, and government funding, and it's through these kind of partnerships with our funders, and indeed then with you all on the ground, that we can kind of collectively make all of these wonderful changes that we want to see happen. So I am with that going to move on, and I think probably best to we go through all the presentations, and I will come back to any questions in the chat when we get to the Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. That was fascinating. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions for Kelsey, please put them in the chat box. And moving on, we'll go on to Owen from Historic England. Over to you, Owen.
Thank you. And as I try and sort out the technology, I think you can all see that now. I'll explain who I am. Hello, I'm Owen Lloyd James. I am there we go. I'm head of places strategy at Historic England and the strategic lead for our High Streets programme, and it's lovely to see in the audience some representatives from our High Streets and broader HAS projects. Welcome to you, you excellent people. Right, so no, I'll stay there first. So I should be outlining some of the more recent and emerging central government funds. I've got 10 minutes, and so I'm not going to be able to provide chapter and verse, but hopefully give you enough to give you an idea of whether they might be worthy of further investigation. Also, it's not exhaustive, but I've selected those which I think might be of particular interest to an audience such as this. So if I start with the existing funds that have been launched over the last couple of years, we have the Future High Streets Fund, which is England focused and focused on high street regeneration through investing in innovative proposals around transport, housing delivery and public services. The 72 areas are due to receive up to £25 million of funding from government, and those areas were announced on Boxing Day last year, with decisions taken on the basis of business cases put together by local partnerships but led by local authorities. Of course, whilst the ceiling for government funding is 25 million, with matched funding, some will be spending far more than that. And with business cases agreed, those places are now at the stage of developing their more detailed plans. And within that, we also have Historic England. Within that, Historic England received £92 million from central government. And we've also added 3 million from the Heritage Fund, and with the resources from Historic England, the total value of our whole programme will be just north of £100 million. That represents the biggest ever single investment by government in the UK's built heritage. And I will give you a bit more info on what this money is being spent on in a tick. And lastly, we have the AHF's 15 million Transforming Places Through Heritage programme. And given that Kelsey has just spoken, I probably don't need to go through and explain that in any more detail. But it is worth making the point that there are a number of places where these funds overlap. Some places are receiving money from more than one of these funds. That in itself is recognition that sometimes the needs demands that multi-layered approach. The funds were developed to be complementary, and Historic England has spoken at length with the AHF and MHCLG to make that happen. Essentially, they are all about helping to develop successful popular high streets. The difference being is that they are seeking to do that in slightly different ways. So, as promised, this is our High Streets Heritage Action Zones programme. It's a 4-year programme. We are spending in total £95 million with a focus on local partnerships, most being led by local authorities, but not all. And we have representation from Tilsley in the audience today, which is great. Each of those high street houses will be supporting regeneration and new uses, including housing. And within that is an embedded cultural programme, which will complement the capital works being undertaken on each of the high streets. On your screen now, we have our 3 investment objectives to change the perception of the high streets, to support sustainable economic and cultural growth, and to restore and enhance local historic character, all of which interlink and are essentially about bringing people back. and making high streets vibrant and successful places. There we are. This slide shows you where our 67 high street heritage action zones are. I know it's not very clear, but also if you've got your screen like mine, you have my face covering some of the map. Apologies for that. But if you want to know more, it's all on the Historic England website, so you can check where your nearest high street has is, if you so desire. Now, these 67 places represent a lot of high streets for us to be working with, and we've been doing so during a global pandemic and the resulting lockdown. Now, obviously, this has been challenging, but I think we're in a place where work is beginning on the ground in lots of high streets, and so we're optimistic that we've been able to respond positively to the challenges posed by the pandemic. A pandemic that has, it should be noted, exacerbated a lot of the problems that the fund was designed to respond to. Moving away from the high street, just one more of the current funds I'd like to mention, and that is the Towns Fund. Now, the Towns Fund prospectus says that this funding will help to increase economic growth with a focus on regeneration, improved transport, better broadband connectivity, skills, and importantly, culture. And the prospectus, in fact, uses one of Historic England's own projects as one of its case studies. Now, it represents £3.6 billion being spent in 101 selected towns across the UK and is intended to align with other sources of investment to create the right conditions to regenerate the towns selected. It is for those towns to develop proposals for how this will be achieved, i.e. there's no prescribed approach being laid down by government, but government will be assessing those proposals, or for some cases has assessed those proposals. Now, whilst this fund is being developed in stages, each of the town's partnerships are currently working with MHCLG in developing how this money will be spent. Moving on to those upcoming funds. Now, this year's budget was a significant one for the heritage sector. Building on both the Towns Fund and the High Streets Fund, we've seen further recognition of the role heritage and culture plays in making successful places. There seems now to be recognition in the highest parts of government of the value of investing in the historic environment. And this was reflected in the announcement of a number of significant funds. Now, I don't intend to dive into too much detail on these, but if you want to learn more, then it's probably makes sense for you to take a look at the gov.uk website. But by way of a summary, there is firstly the Levelling Up Fund, which is £4.8 billion. For this, everywhere in the UK has been placed into one of three tiers. Tier 1 are those where the need is greatest even. The objective is to support investment in places where it can make the biggest difference to everyday life. Local authorities are invited to submit proposals or to bid to access this funding, with priority given to those in Tier 1. The first round of funding will be based around three themes. Firstly, smaller transport projects that make a genuine difference to local areas. Secondly, town centre and again, high street regeneration. And lastly, support for maintaining and expanding the UK's world-leading portfolio of cultural and heritage assets. Next, we have the Community Renewal Fund. Now, this will help support local areas, and again, it's local authorities who are expected to apply, in the UK to pilot imaginative new approaches and programmes that unleash their potential and instill pride and prepare them to take full advantage of the UK's Shared Prosperity Fund when it launches in 2022. Included in the list of things that the fund will be seeking to address is exploring opportunities for promoting culture-led regeneration and community development. And lastly, just for this budget, we have the Community Ownership Fund. Now here we have £150 million for community groups within the UK will be able to bid for up to £250,000 of matched funding to help them buy or take over local community assets at risk of being lost to run as community-owned businesses. In exceptional cases, up to 100 million matched funding will be available to help establish community-owned sports clubs or help buy sports grounds at risk of being lost without community intervention. Detail of how these funds will be managed and how decisions will be taken are still being worked out. But this represents a significant opportunity for the heritage, cultural and community sectors. If you can see opportunities here, I would suggest further investigation at this stage would be useful. Now, building on that opportunities point, I just wanted to pull together some threads that run through some of those funds. Principally, the High Street funds, the Towns funds, and the Levelling Up Fund. They are all place-based. And by that, I mean they're not targeting a single issue, problem, or building, but are seeking to improve the wider conditions of the area being targeted. To do that will involve a multifaceted approach, potentially including issues such as transport, public realm, local facilities, and developing local skills and capacity. Programs of work should have long-term beneficial impacts on the places themselves and the people that live, work, and visit them. For each, it is the local authority that is invited to bid or prepare proposals outlining what they need and what they want to achieve. Whilst it is nearly always the local authority leading these kinds of bids, they are certainly not going to be the only people delivering. Inherent within the place-based approach, which sits at the heart of each of these funds, is partnership. The need to bring local people behind a single vision for the place. Successful proposals will need to be built around the collaboration of local partners, groups, and communities. And this does present opportunities for those that are in the right place and are able to engage. So how would you engage? Well, you find out if your local authority has or is bidding, and look, if appropriate and practical, to get involved. Your engagement can add value and can help shape how change and regeneration might be approached. As I said, part and parcel in this approach to funding is partnership. No one organisation, not even the local authority, can affect the change of the type and depth expected, and therefore the approach needs to be joined up with including government, businesses, and local communities. And now, this is also not just a question of accessing funding. It is also a question of influencing potentially positive change. Using the High Street as an example, investment in one element or institution, for example, the Arts Council investing in theatre, repair being made to a church, or investment in a historic local attraction, all of which attract people to the place, which benefits all those that use or are involved in that place. It is important that these funds are shaped by the communities that are directly affected. So definitely get involved if there is an opportunity to attract funding, but don't only get involved to attract funding. Now, obviously, not everywhere will benefit, but those who do have the potential for wide-ranging and long-term sustainable change. And I think I'll stop there, and I suspect I've gone a little bit under time, so others can kind of top me up there and speak a bit longer, if that's okay. Can I hand back to you,
Owen? Yeah, you're
brilliant.
Dead on 10 minutes. That was perfect. Thank you so much. If anyone's got any questions for Owen, please put them in the chat and we'll pose them to him later on. So now I'll hand over to Anne Jenkins from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Hi, Anne.
Hi there, morning everyone. I'm just attempting to share my screen, which is a major miracle if it actually works.
It's worked, we can see it.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you. So for those not so familiar with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, I thought I'd just give you a brief overview of the organisation. So we're the largest dedicated funder of heritage in the UK. And we believe that understanding, valuing and sharing our heritage brings people together, inspires pride in communities and boosts investment in local economies, which I think is probably more important now than ever before. We distribute national lottery grants from £3,000 up to £5 million, providing support that sustains and transforms the UK's heritage. We don't define heritage, we ask people to tell us what they think is important to them. But generally speaking, it covers a huge range of things, from historic buildings and townscapes, museums and archives, industrial, maritime and transport heritage, nature and landscapes, parks, and community history and culture. We're a project-based funder and we can support projects which are a mixture of capital and revenue or just activity-based schemes. And we support mainly not-for-profit organisations such as local authorities, charities, trusts and voluntary groups, and also faith groups, and we can support private owners in some circumstances too. So I'm now trying to move my screen on, which it doesn't seem to want to do. Yeah, sorry about this, folks.
Don't worry, Anne, that's fine.
I will just stop sharing and then see if I can move it on. Sorry about this. I'll go into a different view. Oops.
The joys of technology. It definitely worked earlier.
Perfect. Can you see the second one? Am I sharing the...
Very pretty picture.
Right, lovely. Okay, we'll stick with that then. So we're currently working to our strategic funding framework. Everyone has a funding framework, don't they? We're working to our current one, which was launched in 2019, and it runs for 5 years up to 2024. And just to run quickly through the key features of that, there's one grant programme called National Lottery Grants for Heritage, and that's divided into 3 size bands. They are £3,000 to £10,000, 10,000 to £250,000, and then £250,000 up to £5 million. And information and requirements and timescales are proportionate to how much money is requested. It's local decision making, so up to £250,000. Our staff make decisions on those applications, and I'm sure you all know Liz Bates, who is making decisions on applications in the Midlands and East, which I'm delighted about. And then our area and country committees make decisions on applications over £250,000. We have 9 outcomes, including 1 mandatory one, which is that a wider range of people will be involved in heritage. And that's at the heart of every project we support. So there's an emphasis on inclusion and also on environmental sustainability. The priorities that were set out in that framework are around land and nature, community heritage and heritage at risk. But just to be clear, we're still absolutely funding the full breadth of heritage. So we've made some adjustments to our priorities for 2021-22, this financial year. And we're focusing on heritage projects delivering economic and social benefits that support the UK's recovery from the pandemic. So the 9 outcomes that we normally look for in every project we support, we've prioritised 6 this financial year. So all of our projects have to achieve 1 or more of the priority outcomes. And smaller projects might just achieve the mandatory one, but as usual, we expect the outcomes of a project to be proportionate to the size of grant that's being requested. And just to be clear, we're still interested in the other outcomes that are listed on that slide, as long as everyone is having a go at 1 or more of those priority ones. You don't have to try and achieve all of them, but a nice balance is often good. And in the context of high streets, I thought we'd just take a quick look at a couple of the outcomes that are listed in those priorities. And a really important one is that the local area will be a better place to live, work or visit. And here we're looking for perhaps heritage being at the heart of helping a place to thrive, a shared vision involving local communities in future planning, perhaps helping to improve urban green spaces within a townscape, maybe pocket parks or town squares, which help to encourage dwell time and also perhaps leisure uses in the town. Partnerships focusing on more ambitious plans maybe for entire historic streets or towns, and thinking about and celebrating what gives a place its unique identity, and also how to make places livable for people and businesses. And another one on their priority outcomes, the local economy will be boosted. Here you might be looking at providing premises for new businesses, attracting visitors and creating new jobs. So all of our projects have to demonstrate that they have taken environmental sustainability into account as well. And that might be, that's a mixture of increasing the positive benefits, but also reducing the negative impacts too. And of course, we look at risk, and these days, we're obviously really interested in projects considering the impact of COVID on their business plans and their general operation. So I think there's a real synergy at the moment between what our priorities are and high street recovery. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of projects we're currently supporting that relate to high street regeneration that would still be very relevant to this year's priority outcomes. And here we have a glorious picture, I think, of Carrington Street in Nottingham. It's the key route that connects the railway station to the city centre, and it's one of the first views that visitors see when they exit the station. And here the City Council received funding of around £700,000, including money to develop the project, and towards a total investment of about £1.7 million. And the City Council's worked with private owners to improve frontages, to bring upper floors back into use, to repair and reinstate architectural features and the public realm. They created a joint fund which private owners could apply to cover up to 67% of their costs. And the investment is part of the wider city regeneration going on in Nottingham. I think it's created a real sense of place in this part of the city and has vastly improved the first impressions which visitors have when they arrive by train. It's also offered training opportunities in traditional skills and activities to engage young people. And I think this type of project can be a real catalyst for further investment. But funding like this is available to historic high streets and townscapes through National Lottery Grants for Heritage. And I think it's worth mentioning that we've broadened out the joint pot idea so that anyone can apply for a pot of money, we call it a community grant, to distribute yourselves. And I think that's often helpful for organisations who are looking to encourage a real sort of deep community involvement in historic places and townscapes. And I think we've got people in the audience from Newcastle under Lyme, so they might recognise this building. It's the Belong Heritage Gallery. And this is a project which came to us under our former Heritage Enterprise programme, and again we continue to support this type of scheme. Here a not-for-profit dementia specialist, Belong Limited, worked with a private developer, Prime UK, to transform this derelict Grade 2 listed former coach house in the centre of Newcastle under Lyme. And we awarded a grant of nearly £1.8 million towards the restoration of the building and its transformation into a multi-purpose space, which not only tells the story of the building's rich history, but includes a tea room, a hair salon, a nail bar, a library, a craft space, and a reminiscence room for people with dementia and their carers. And it's part of a wider residential care complex in the town centre. In addition to providing a financially viable future for the building, the project created jobs, improved the environment, and contributed to the ongoing regeneration of the town centre. And just a word on Heritage Enterprise. It's a process within the National Lottery Grants for Heritage programme, and it's targeted at projects that seek to achieve economic growth by investing in heritage. It's aimed at enterprise and community organisations and also at commercial organisations working in partnership with community organisations to help them rescue neglected buildings and sites and return them to a viable use. And it's about supporting a conservation deficit which would otherwise make the commercial investment unviable. So by closing the gap, we're hoping to encourage greater private sector involvement with heritage projects, working in partnership with community organisations. And just finally, I wanted to touch on, I think you can see the wording around the screen. Anyway, I just wanted to touch on this project because I think it's a different sort of project to traditional bricks and mortar thing. But it's, I think, it's really important to stress that activity projects can bring people and vibrancy back into a high street. So in this example, it was called My Route. It was run by an organisation called Sampad South Asian Arts, and they received a grant of around about £250,000. Which took inspiration from the number 5 bus route that runs along the Stratford Road in Birmingham. The project documented the heritage of communities living in the culturally rich suburbs of Birmingham. And it was an 18-month investigation of all the communities living along the Stratford Road. It looked at religion, trade, food and architecture, as well as capturing people's memories of the area. And local volunteers got involved. They were trained in archiving and data collection to help them capture community stories. And the project created an interactive digital map, a mobile app, digital map, a mobile app, and a school's downloadable resource pack to help people engage with their local place. But there was a programme of events too, including a series of really lovely free heritage taxi rides along the road, and an exhibition which comprised images and sandboxes which positioned along the road, and it drew people in to the street and helped them understand their local area a bit more. So I hope that gives you a small flavour of the scope of our funding and how it can be applied in all sorts of ways to help transform our high streets. And overall, as Owen was saying, we're really interested in how we can work more strategically with partners to help improve local places and with individual groups too, to use heritage to add value to places and to local communities. Thanks very much. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was really interesting. I just want to move on very quickly over to Mick. We're running a little bit behind, so I'm just going to keep it moving on a little bit. So over to you, Mick.
Okay, thank you for that, Bev. Hello, everyone. My name's Mick Mcgrath. I an organisation called Locality. Basically, we're a membership organisation, got well over 1,000 members across the country, doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. They very often started doing one thing, and sometimes that was around wanting to save a heritage building in the local community, but then they moved on to a whole range of other things which the community needed. So I'm going to talk about some funding opportunities which require a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of where you go to and why you might want to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly talk about the neighbourhood planning funding opportunity relating to transforming the high street. I'll also talk briefly about community-led housing, which is a sort of housing programme which is currently live, and then I'll give you a brief example of Glendale Gateway Trust and how they did basically a lot of this stuff all in one go. So neighbourhood planning funding is how it relates to transforming the high street. There's a good link there in terms of just understanding what neighbourhood planning is all about. But neighbourhood planning, in effect, gives communities direct power to develop a shared vision for their neighbourhood and shape the development and growth of their local area. So it also provides a powerful set of tools for local people to plan the types of development to meet the community's needs and where the ambition of the neighbourhood is aligned with the strategic needs and priorities of the wider local plan. So in short, what that means is it's all about delivering a neighbourhood plan which links to your local plan. The idea being that provides you as a community with a lot more influence than sitting there having things done to you. So neighbourhood planning is a sort of a process which allows a community to have its say. There are funding and resources available. So for example, if you start with a basic grant, there's up to £10,000. Similarly, you can go up to £26,000 if you've got a number of other aspects going on with your support, and that allows you to buy in, for example, planning support from certain organisations. It allows you to get technical support to develop certain things. So it provides also opportunities for the community infrastructure levy, and if you're not aware of what this is, if a community has done a neighbourhood plan and the local authority signed up to this idea, you can get 25% of any planning gain money, if you like, which was allocated to the area to be spent on things which you've identified within your neighbourhood plan. So again, it's about you being able to say, this is what we want, these are the priorities. Similarly, it allowed you to get design guides done, which of course is a clear thing that a lot of heritage groups will have an eye on. It's also about opportunity to deliver quality outcomes through a coherent plan as well. So it allows you to think clearly and have that real community engagement benefit. Indirect benefits are that it allows for strong community engagement. It provides clear needs for to be identified for funding bids and business plans. So a lot of the things which funders always ask for, you will have delivered within a neighbourhood plan, and it's quite an easy way of getting that. The downside, of course, is that neighbourhood planning can take some significant amount of time, maybe year, 2 years, even 3 years in terms of the making, depending on things. But nevertheless, over 1,000 communities have done neighbourhood plans, and there are more and more doing them. So in terms of an example of a funding opportunity, the reality is, as you know, funding opportunities come and go regularly. In this instance, through the neighbourhood plan, there is funding available to groups who are developing a neighbourhood plan, where they're seeking to establish a high street regeneration scheme. There's also funding to be eligible for this bespoke high street and social infrastructure support. As I said, you need to be working on a neighbourhood plan. And it does provide you with an opportunity for up to £15,000. Now, the reality is you may not have a neighbourhood plan, in which case this isn't open for you. So I guess I'm talking to the people that possibly have and weren't aware of this and see this as a potential opportunity. But it certainly is and relevant to the agenda. And who knows, there may be other opportunities for this sort of funding opportunities as we go along. Community-led housing, it's very much about creating affordable housing for people. Very often it's about providing housing for people to downsize. It's about providing high quality housing to ensure that people have got housing fit for purpose. It's also about pre-development of refurbishment or new build sort of stage. So we have a £4 million programme which we're launching shortly through Locality. It isn't our money, but we're managing it, which will say provide groups who are well advanced on their thinking, their planning around housing sort of project. It also allows groups to diversify income. And again, this is something I come back to time and time again with Locality and other groups, is we're really encouraging groups not to be reliant just on funding opportunities. It's very much about diversifying income. So I'll give you a quick example of Wooler High Street in Northumberland. Wooler's a small market town, and the Glendale Gateway Trust exists to make the lives of local people better. They're Locality members. They operate a community and business centre in Wooler, and also a number of commercial units on the high street, 20 affordable housing properties, youth hostel and shepherd hut. So they've got their fingers in so many pies in their community, but clearly as a result of the work they're doing, their high street isn't just coping, it's thriving. Lots of those would-be empty properties are being used for a range of different aspects. So in this particular example, the former Wooler Barclays Bank was being brought back into use for community-led housing and wider community use. You know, it's an iconic building on the high street which had been empty for a number of years. They were able to purchase it, and the great thing was that they actually got support from Barclays Bank to do that as well. Building is a grade 2 listed, and it's probably the most impressive building on the high street. So again, it sends a really important message out that the high street is important to us, and we're starting with the most important building in it. The Trust plans to convert the 2 upper floors to affordable housing, the ground floor to be decided, but that will be determined by residents and local businesses. And again, the idea being it will ultimately add value to the high street offer. They've got a whole range of partners involved, engaged with them, and clearly that's the name of the game when they're trying to do lots of different things. So you'll see who they are from that. The group also undertook a neighbourhood plan as well. So again, they're a really good example of how they were able to prioritise the issues based on the research which they had. Excuse me. Very briefly, some other examples of affordable homes from commercial, empty commercial spaces. Goodwin Trust, another Locality member from up Holway, took over Queen's House, again former bank site in the centre of Hull with a 100-year lease. They're letting for affordable rent, providing 2 studios, 6 1-bed and 8 2-bed apartments above a Lloyds Bank building. 2 other examples there. One is from Centre in London, which was a former factory which had lain empty and derelict for a number of years, again now providing affordable housing and a community hub. Similarly, in Bury St Edmunds, they took over an old brewery, and there are something like 30 odd affordable housing properties there. So in summary, neighbourhood planning allows proper community engagement, understanding of the priorities, all the things which are useful in pulling a strong funding proposal together. And as I said, the idea of having additional funding coming your way as a result of you having that plan could be tempting too. There are communities getting on with transforming the high streets on a range of scales. I think the point is, at the moment, don't waste a good crisis. The reality is there's lots of money being thrown at it. There are lots of opportunities where even local authorities who had money, such as Towns Fund, thrown at them, have gone to groups and said, can you help us spend this money? Sounds bizarre in this climate, but it has happened, and those opportunities can happen. So sometimes it's about having things in place where if someone up comes asking you for a good idea, you've got those ideas in place. It's also about taking on assets and including community-led housing within them should provide a reliable income stream. The reality is most lenders, for example, Charity Bank, very, very often lend to groups and provide a good lending rates because there's low risk, because there is bricks and mortar there. And generally all of this makes the local high street relevant, vibrant and increasingly unique where these activities are going on. And I personally think this is the future. There are great opportunities to do this sort of work, but it does require patience. It does require good ideas, good thinking, and people to step forward and develop the confidence. So that's me in a quick ramble through.
Thank you, Mick. That was fantastic. I will move on now to Becky. As before, if you've got any questions for Mick or for Anne, who was on previously, please do put them in the chat and we'll ask them all at the end. So Becky, take it away.
Hello, let me just see if I can share my screen.
I think.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
We can.
Just trying to actually restart the slideshow, which it isn't letting me. Hope you're all right. It's a little bit hard, isn't it, listening to lots of presentations in a row. Here we are. So my name is Becky Jameson. I work for Arts Council England. I'm based in the London office. I've noticed I don't think we've got anyone from London here today, so I will apologise if I don't have enough intel on your areas, but let's see how we go. So Arts Council England is the main public funder for arts and culture in England. Obviously, there are also the Arts Council of Wales, Arts Council of Northern Ireland and Creative Scotland. So if you're based in any of those areas, please do look at information on websites there. I'm not sure of details of what's going on in those arts councils. We invest public money from government and the National Lottery. We're an arm's length body, so we sit under the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, and we split ourselves into 5 areas. So we have the North, Midlands, South East, London and the South West. And we have teams of relationship managers like myself on the ground who can offer advice, talk to people, assess applications, assess more applications, as is the case at the moment, and we sort of monitor and manage funding relationships with organisations and individuals. We've recently announced a new strategy, so if you're interested in applying to us for any funds, I recommend that you look at Let's Create. It's basically based around 3 outcomes, so creative people, creative communities, and a creative and cultural country. Today I'm going to talk about mainly 2 open access funding streams. So this would primarily be for activity and projects rather than for buildings. We do sometimes have some capital funding for arts and cultural buildings, but there isn't any live at the moment. I'm also going to touch on one of our projects called Creative People and Places towards the end as well. There may be future announcements about more place-based stuff coming in May, but a lot of this is subject to DCMS and there's nothing we can talk about at the moment being in PERDA. We're limited on what we can and can't say of what might come up. When we talk about arts and culture, these are the things that we mean. So we mean something that is based around music, theatre, museums practice, visual arts, dance, libraries, combined arts or literature. So I know culture can mean lots of different things to different people, but this is what it means in the context of our funding. if you do ever apply to us, we've got an online portal called Grantium. Just to warn you, it does take a few days to get an account set up, so don't go on thinking you can press submit on that day. And it's not, I shouldn't be saying this publicly probably, but some people do find Grantium challenging, so you're not alone in that. And if you need any support, our inquiries team can help. If you need any access support at any point when you're applying to us, we do have money available to help remove barriers. So we have guidance available in different formats, and we can also pay for the cost of an access support worker to help complete application forms. So if that's needed at any point, you don't need to prove anything, you just need to email our inquiries team and just put access or access support in the subject line, so they can filter through quite quickly to get you support as soon as possible. So project grants, the basics. So this is open for anyone who wants to make artistic or cultural experiences that reach the public, either now or in the future. So how it might relate to high streets, it might be that an artist or an arts organisation is going to take over a space for a period of time to run a project. That's probably sort of a really clear, obvious link. Yeah, so something to think about. It's a rolling fund, you can apply at any time. So there's various amounts you can apply for. Most people come in for between 1,000 and 15,000, and the decisions on that take currently up to 10 weeks. Sometimes we try and do it in 6 weeks, but since COVID, we've more than doubled in terms of the amount of applications that we're processing. So things are taking a little longer. For anyone coming in for over 15,000, it can take up to 16 weeks. This used to be 12 weeks, but we're, as I say, giving ourselves a little bit of wiggle room because we've been under quite a lot of internal pressure with increased applications. These are the sort of things that people might apply for. So it might be doing research for a new project. And when we're talking about project, we're talking about some sort of activity rather than a capital project. Might be making new work, events, workshops, touring work. These are things that you can't apply for, so things that won't reach people in England, things that have already happened, school, university courses, business running costs, or cinema or fashion. There's loads more information on our website with more details of what you can and can't apply for. So if you do want to apply, do have a nosy there. At the moment, we've got a 60 million budget until April 21. There's no match funding requirement currently. It did used to be 10%, but since COVID, we've removed that. We have more flexibility around what public engagement means in this season. And you need to ensure that any activity is COVID safe and is meeting government guidance. So that was just a whistle-stop tour of project grants. I'm going to just touch on developing your creative practice. So this is a fund that is probably less relevant for most of you guys. This is really for artists or creative practitioners to develop their own work. So it's not about putting on something for public. This is about developing their own work. And it might be that you want to partner with someone and offer them space in order to use that space to develop their own work. These are for grants of between 2,000 and 10,000. We're currently assessing and about to announce our latest round, and there'll be further rounds to be announced in future. So this is about personal creative development. Just to reiterate that if anyone does have any access costs that they need, that isn't taken into account in terms of the maximum that you can apply for. So for example, if you're applying for 15,000 for project grants and you had, say, 3,000 access costs, you could come in for an £18,000 project grants, and it would be classed as a 15,000 one. Okay, so creative people and places. This is a little bit more place-based, which is why I'm going to talk about it. This is a quite substantial funding opportunity that is about more people choosing, creating and taking part in brilliant art experiences where they live. rather than, most of our funding streams are about artists or organisations creating work to bring audiences into. This is a project that is about turning it on its head a little bit. So it's really about trying to put the power with audiences. So it's about consortia working with local people to plan, design, create the activity they want to take part in. Nationally, there are currently 43 places that are existing CPPs, as we call them. There's currently a funding round open, which will invest between 750,000 and 1 million for each project that is successful over 3 years. So there are 109 eligible boroughs across England, and that includes existing CPPs who will most likely be reapplying as well. There is a webinar about this on the 11th of May. There's lots more information online. And just quickly, I mean, you probably can't see this, although the slides are going to get sent to you afterwards. This is a list of the eligible places. There is a space on our website where you can express interest in being involved in a specific place. So you can register your interest and connect with other people in your area who may want to be putting in an application. So the way this works is a lead organisation applies on behalf of a consortium of about 5 or 6 organisations. And it's really about reaching audiences in a different way, giving them the power to decide what they want, when and how. So that's it. There are plenty of resources on our website. You can see our website there. Just search project grants, DYCP or creative people and places on our website to find out about any of those specifically. And we've also got our inquiries email address. In terms of changes that have happened since COVID, just to keep you abreast, we've been delivering the Cultural Recovery Fund on behalf of DCMS. So a lot of our time over the last year has been dishing out that money to a lot of different organisations. It's been very, very competitive. We've processed more than double the amount of funds that we normally get. So internally, we're quite busy. So apologies if you do email inquiries and don't get a response for several days. We used to try and, I think we used to get about 20 emails a day about project grants, and it's gone up to sort of 120. So everyone is doing their best in terms of workload. So be patient with us, please. That's it from me. Any questions? I think you'll have a chance in a little while to ask them. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Becky. You fit so much into that 10 minutes. Wonderful. Right, I think we were going to have a very quick break, but if Kelsey's still here, yes, you are here, thank you. I thought we would probably be better, because we're running about 15 minutes behind, if we just go straight into the panel discussion, if that's okay with you.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I ask the other panelists to turn their cameras back on? Thank you all. I mean, I think it was, hopefully we've been trying to kind of address some questions that have been coming in via the chat function while they're coming in. Please panelists, keep an eye on those and answer any questions that are obviously for you. And please, the rest of you continue to kind of send in questions via the chat function, and we can pick those up in a minute. I thought that it would be worth having touching on some of the kind of core questions that seem naturally to flow out of those presentations just first, and including Becky, you kind of kicked us off a little bit with thinking about, obviously, the Cultural Recovery Fund. Everyone will have been aware of the 1.57 billion from the government that was delivered largely by Arts Council and Lottery, and with also support from Historic England and others. Does anybody, I wonder if any of maybe Becky or Anne, if you have any insight into whether there will be or might be any future rounds of that funding that people should keep an eye out for?
I can say that I think people will have spotted in the last budget that the Chancellor announced an additional £300 million boost for the Cultural Recovery Fund, coming up as part of that wider £408 million package for arts and culture. I mean, certainly all I know at the moment is that discussions about how that might be delivered and what it will look like are still ongoing. So I think there'll probably be an announcement in the next few weeks, but that's about as much as we can say at the moment, I think.
I would agree with Anne on that one. So watch this space. There will likely be an announcement coming.
Fabulous. That's great. And as obviously, as Owen also kind of addressed, as well as additional potential cultural recovery funding, there are also have been and a number of additional new funds which have been announced, and will be more information will be available on how to engage with those in the kind of weeks and months to come, with the community ownership fund and things like that. So one thing I would say, encouraging everyone to make sure that, if you've got a project, reaching out to your local authority and making sure that they know about your project and they know you're kind of moving forward and ready to go, because some of these funds will be administered, from the local authorities would need to apply on behalf of projects and things. So make sure they know who you are and what you are doing. The other thing I think is really interesting has been, obviously we say it has been an interesting time to live in with heavy inverted commas. But one of the things I've noticed as working in funding is that there have been some shifts in funding practice and kind of expectations around funding practice during this time. I think Becky kind of alluded to the Arts Council dropping the 10% matching requirement and things like that. It has been a time where funders have been encouraged correctly to be as flexible with funding as possible. I know that we at the AHF have extended grant periods and things like that, and offered various different opportunities for flexibility where it was appropriate. It's something that I think there's many of you may have seen the Institute for Voluntary Action Research commitments on flexible funding that many of us have signed up to. It is something I will say as a recipient, and I'm looking at many of my colleagues here who are even more directly recipients of public funding. It is something that there are limitations sometimes on what we are able to do, how we're able to be flexible. But it is something that I know that we at the AHF have done quite a lot of thinking about how we can be more flexible. And I would encourage you to, when you have funders, whether they're philanthropic funders, foundations, or indeed any of the organizations in the room, if you're having issues and you're struggling to get things done on time, talk to your grant officers and things like that. I know that everyone is really wanting to be kind of supportive and recognizing that it has been challenging to get things done in time, to kind of the schedules we planned back in the before times. So I wondered if any of Becky or anybody else, if you have any other comments about any changes that you think changes in practice, funding practice that might last that have developed during this time.
We've certainly tried to reduce as many of our monitoring requirements as we can. I know right at the start of COVID, we actually stopped our project grants program, which received mixed response, but we stopped that for a while to run a emergency response fund for individuals and organisations. That was prior to the government announcing the Cultural Recovery Fund. So I think where we can, we will be as light touch as possible with what we require. And there's still debate, for example, about the match funding of the 10% match, whether that's going to come back or not. And there's lots of pros and cons with that. The cons are we're getting way more applications than we normally get, and it's quite hard to administer. But the pros are it makes it much more accessible for a wider variety of people.
Kelsey, I just think I'd pick up on your point really, and it's not so much a change, but I just think it's so important that if you're delivering a project and you're experiencing difficulties, then communication is absolutely the key, because the earlier a funder knows that there are issues, the earlier we can help to support the organisation to resolve them. And I think that's the, you know, just do talk to your contact at the organisation, whichever funder you're working with. I think we're all, you know, in the same boat, that we want to help as much as possible. That's the whole purpose of our organisations, is to facilitate projects and enable them to go ahead successfully, and letting us know if there are difficulties as early as possible is really a good way of helping us to support the organisation in resolving them.
I also think the reality is post-September, that's when we may start seeing who's really, really struggling. The reality is, I think lots of groups, and very generalistic, have been able to cope because there has been quite generous funding thrust out the door very quickly with a few questions asked. But as I say, post-September, when you have issues about will people use centres and so forth, and if they're not, how are they going to earn income? Similarly, about all the furloughed staff, you know, there's some real challenges there. And I also think the whole idea of a model of having assets was generally seen as a way of being able to generate income, and there are some of the groups who probably struggle most in this climate, because they've got an asset but they can't do anything with it, and so there's costs associated with that which they're not necessarily receiving. So, you know, the reality is there are going to be real challenges. And from talking to other funders, I'm chair of the Regional Funding Forum for East Midlands, there are lots of concerns about how this is going to happen, but at the same point, it does provide great opportunities for people to think in different ways. They're having to think in different ways. There's not going to be enough money, we know that. And I think the reality of people thinking about loans and diversifying income generation are things people have talked about for years, but I think increasingly people have to do more of, particularly if they want to be able to sort of deliver significant projects. And capital is going to be a big issue as well in terms of grant funding. When does that tap come back on, and what's happened with the backlog? So yeah, lots and lots of challenges, but say, don't waste a good crisis.
Thank you, Mick. That, you know, that really kind of brings us on to something else that I think is really interesting. Is obviously this has been a very difficult time for everyone, and it'd be great to get a sense from all of you in the room of the particular challenges you see projects facing maybe over the next few months, but also where you've seen creative kind of enterprising solutions and responses to that have put projects on more kind of sustainable footing. So does anybody want to come in on some advice and thoughts there? Becky?
I think some of the challenges, so I know the freelancers that we support have really struggled in this season. It's been really mixed in terms of what they've been able to access from government on that, depending on the individual. So they've really struggled because they normally get support from regular employment, if you like, from organisations. I think the fallout might be that there's so much pressure on trusts and foundations at the moment, with people asking for funds, and lots of people have diverted to emergency funds. But as people start going back, I think it'll just be a real increase in people applying for funding, and there may not be quite enough money to go round.
Yes, no, I think that's right. I'm also keeping an eye on some of the comments in the chat, and I think Graham has just mentioned a really interesting comment that actually, you know, the local interest in their project has increased, right, and the local access to a number of people engaging with the project has actually increased because of perhaps the kind of increased localism that has been necessary during lockdown. That is something that I know that echoing what Mick's saying, don't waste a good opportunity. Something that we're seeing some projects kind of really engage with is trying to capitalize on, you know, how do they keep those new audiences, and how do they keep, you know, that kind of local feeling, and turn some of this into opportunities. I mean, I mentioned in my presentation that wonderful project on the high street in Bake-Up, where they're, you know, Bake-Up's a bedroom community. Most of people traditionally would work in Manchester or something like that. But actually, if people are wanting to stay local, you know, then local workspaces will become more important and become more used. So, you know, keeping those kind of, what are the ways you can capitalize on, I know it's hard to think of anything positive about the last year, but, you know, where there have been opportunities, you know, capitalizing on those, I think makes a lot of sense. It's also, you know, the case that you know, lots of places, you know, throughout the country may have actually more people staying within their local area for a while. So that's something I would like to think about. Owen, is your hand up?
It was loitering in that direction, yes. I think yes, I think you're entirely right. The long-term impact of the pandemic is going to be that increased idea of people staying local, and therefore increasing demand for those kind of, we keep using the local to mean lots of different things, but those kind of services that are close to where you are. Of course, there is a flip side to that, is that demand is being taken out of cities and larger conurbations where we used to all disappear off into offices and then visit Greg's or Costa or whatever for our teas and coffees, and then maybe the pub in the evening. And so there is a flip side to that. I think moving forward, there are two issues. Firstly, the level of uncertainty about what's actually going to happen, and the degree to which some of these things will just bounce back, because we are essentially creatures of habit. And so in 2 years' time, how different will our working life be? But secondly, and I think it's a point mentioned by Mick and others earlier, is the fact the impact of the pandemic doesn't cease when all lockdowns are released and we are able to visit high streets or we are able to operate in a way we did before all this happened, because behaviors would have changed, and it's important that there is support, that support that's available now does continue as we move out of lockdown, because people will continue to struggle then. And how do we support those people, those organizations then, when these big cultural recovery style funds cease to be available? I think there's going to be a tapering off of those, and there needs to be an adjustment in what kind of level of support that remains, you know, if optimistically, you know, after say September this year, when people are kind of, when we are freer to do what we used to do.
I think that's right, Owen, and I guess that kind of also leads on to, I mean, something that, you know, before we wrap up, because we want to get to your questions, I'm going to ask everybody to give their last piece of kind of advice of what they would recommend projects be thinking about when they're moving forward, preparing applications, and you know, kind of tips on taking projects forward in this kind of post-COVID environment. My top tip is developing plans that are flexible, because I think, as Owen was mentioning, there still are a lot of unknowns. We don't know what the world is yet going to look like in 2 years, and how behaviors may or may not have changed. And a lot of people bandy around quite a lot of assumptions that I think that I'm completely unconvinced that we definitely know cities are dying, or we definitely know that they're not dying. So I would encourage everybody to develop really flexible plans. There are lots of multi-use buildings we're seeing as a strong trend. That wonderful building on the high street in Wooler that Mick showed you, that's had some transforming places funding as well. We think it's a great project. It's community use in the ground floor, housing above. I mean, that kind of mixed use building we think has a lot of inherent flexibility, and therefore more likely sustainability. And that's really what you need to be looking for in building your projects, is kind of future-proofing them. That's my kind of top tip for the future. Does who would like to go next? Anybody? Yeah, Owen, go ahead. Yeah.
I can only go next because I'm going to steal an idea Mick had earlier on, is be ready for opportunities. That what we'll see over the next few years, like we have levelling up, first year levelling up fund, there'll be subsequent years levelling up fund. We see other funds coming forward. They are going to be wanting to move at pace, and so it will be it will be really useful to have opportunities ready to go to access these types of funding, because often you're not going to have a huge amount of time to prepare bids. So be ready for them for when they come, because they're coming.
I'll just take the last scrap of what I was going to say. Thanks, Owen. Yeah, linked to that is the idea of having open minds, talk to new people, get new partnerships, make sure you understand the opportunities, the lie of the land. Things have changed, things will change. So as a result, you need to make sure you know how that change is happening and how it could affect you.
And I think that partnership point is an important one very often in this type of projects. But also I think just on a more general point, the impact of the digital boom, which we were experiencing pre-COVID, but which has now really taken off. I think we need to think about what impact that has on projects, how you can use it, and how you can use it to broaden your audience and perhaps engage with people that you don't normally engage with.
I think my top tips would be, if you are looking to apply for an arts or cultural project through us, is to really have a look at our website. There's a lot of information there. Really try and put in the strongest application you can. It's quite competitive at the moment. Those of you outside of London will have slightly less competition than anyone in London. But just be really clear about what you're wanting to do and why. Partnerships are really good, and good luck.
Thanks, Becky. There is a lot to be said for reaching out to an organization and trying to have the kind of initial conversations before you put in your applications. I think we all want you to succeed, so there's a lot of kind of ability to help support strong applications. Certainly, I know we have a regional team. You can find their contact details online if you're interested in applying for any of our funding. Should we go now to Bev, to the Q&A, unless there's anything anybody else would like to say among the panelists before that? No? Okay, Bev, should we head over to the Q&A?
We can. There's a few questions. The first few are for Becky. The first one is from Gary, and he's asking, when will the Arts Council's phone support be open?
So I can't answer that at the moment. I suspect it's when we are back in our offices, and we do not know that yet. So since we've all been working from home, it hasn't been possible to have a dedicated phone line in terms of how it's been set up. Yeah, it's not ideal. So it's not open yet. If you do need a physical conversation with someone, do email inquiries and ask for that. If you're in a specific area, you may want to reference that. They may be able to put you in touch with someone in area. Where we can, we do try and talk to people, especially first-time applicants, but there's plenty of people who receive funding from us who haven't had the chance to have a conversation with us. So don't think that it shouldn't actually make a difference on the decision. It just might help you think a little bit about the project beforehand in terms of writing your application. Yeah, so sorry, I can't answer that. I wish they were open now.
Thanks, Becky. Another question for you from Graham is, well, you might not know this, but is Grantium available in Scotland?
I do not know. Grantium is something that the Arts Council runs, is using to run all of their application processes. I'm not aware whether Creative Scotland have the same or a different portal to apply through. So unfortunately, you'll need to go on Creative Scotland's website and ask them or find out through that.
Great stuff. And also, do you know, this is from Vicky, do you know if the Creating Places pot is going to be rolled out to a wider UK audience in the future?
So at the moment, the aim of this fund, and it's quite significant funding that we're putting in quite a different way, The aim of it is really about reaching those who are lowest engaged in arts and culture. So at the moment, the way we've done that is by taking the bottom 33% of places from the Active Lives survey. I think it was the 2015 to 2017 one. So the places might change as surveys get updated and data gets changed. And there may also be further announcements about places, not so much this funding stream, but about place-based work coming for later on this year. So watch this space. But in terms of this funding, it's not, the plan isn't to roll it out further at the moment. When we come to the application process for 25 onwards, the places might be slightly different depending on the latest data that we have.
Great, thanks Becky, that's a good explanation. Just to say, everyone that's attending, we've only got a few questions that I've picked up from the chat box. So if you do want to ask a question in person, if you could raise your hand using the reactions button, and I will also try and flick through the two screens of videos just to see if anybody's waving at the camera. You never know. But moving on to the next question, this is one for Owen. Damien said, you mentioned that the HAS programme was initiated prior to the pandemic. How has the programme responded to fresh challenges that the high streets face as a result of the pandemic?
Right. Two different ways to answer that. Firstly, at a strategic level, what the pandemic has done is exacerbated existing trends affecting the high streets. Is that more people have been forced to shop online, which was always an issue for declining footfall on the high streets, and that has shot up from 33 to about 55% or something, but significantly. And so so those trends that we were expecting to take 5-10 years have happened within the pandemic. And so the rationale on which our program and the Future High Streets Fund and the AHS Fund are based still holds. In fact, they're just more needed. And so what we haven't done is adapted at that kind of strategic level, change the program. But obviously what we've had to do is engage with our partners differently, because for a large number of our high street HASs, we had, some of our key partners were shopkeepers, retailers, those operating in the high street. And there was issues like, expectation of matched funding and works planned to premises, which couldn't happen. And quite understandably, a lot of those expectation of matched funding fell away as people had, because particularly shopkeepers had a lot less money. And so what we've had to do is just talk to our partners and be flexible in terms of matched funding, flexible in terms of timetable, and flexible of what we can do. And also flexible as what else we could possibly do in those spaces. And that's happened just through a process of talking to people, because what we couldn't do, and we certainly shouldn't have done, is introduce kind of across the board, across all 67 high streets, new conditions of how we'd work, because what's affected some high streets hasn't affected others. Some high streets have suffered considerably worse than others. And so what we have done is we have had conversations with all 67, and we have adapted the delivery plans, and we have sought to spend more when their good projects have emerged, and we have relaxed timetable and deadlines in those places that have struggled. What we have found, interestingly, but probably not surprisingly, is that those high streets that are led by community organisations, we have two, and Tilsley is represented here, and we also have Hastings. I don't know if Hastings is represented here or not, but they have been far better placed to operate during this time. And then that's not because local authorities are less good, it's just local authorities are quite rightly have their eye elsewhere. But our community model has really proven wonderfully successful during what is a really difficult time for everyone. And there's probably a lesson we can learn there. But to try and answer succinctly after a long rambling answer, the original question, we've just spoken to partners and been as flexible as we possibly can. And it has now put us in a position that MHCLG are now coming to ask us for advice on how you deliver a high streets regeneration program in the middle of a pandemic. because I think we're now probably the global leaders at how to do that.
Thanks very much, Owen. That's a great answer. And there's one that's just coming for you from, I've not picked up the name, let me just see, from Sarah. She said that she was unsuccessful in a bid to the Heritage Fund in the second round of the Cultural Recovery Fund, not for capital. Is any feedback possible? The email said not, but it would be really useful to know if there will be a further round. I don't know if you can add a comment to that at all.
Yeah, so Cultural Recovery Fund, because it wasn't lottery money, it was money that we were delivering a grant in aid on behalf of Department of Culture, Media and Sport. We've had to operate in a slightly different way to our normal lottery processes. So with a lottery, you'd normally get, you know, feedback and support in various things. And with Culture Recovery Fund, we've had to operate in a very different way, following DCMS guidelines, but also just the sheer volume of things that we were dealing with in a very short space of time. So we haven't really been able to give individual feedback to projects. But I think if and when a third round is announced, we do normally have a helpline available. So, you know, it'd probably be a good idea to pick up the phone then and ask the question.
Great, thank you, Anne. Well, that's all the questions I've come across so far. Has anybody got anything that they want to ask in person? There's no one waving. I can't see anyone waving anyway.
We've been so comprehensive that we've covered everything.
Yeah, we have. Well, the panelists, is there anything else you would like to say?
Not sorry, Becky, go ahead.
I was just going to pick up, I noticed a comment about quite a long response time from us at the moment in terms of our inquiries team. And it was just to apologise really for that. You know, we are really snowed under with inquiries at the minute. I think I heard a stat that email, you know, our inquiries team were getting an email every 2 seconds. You know, it's been really, really full on, and especially with delivering the cultural recovery funds. So hang on in there, if we are doing a future cultural recovery fund, I think there's going to be a dedicated team rather than it spread across our whole organisation, which may hopefully speed things up slightly. But just apologies, you know, we're doing all we can with the limited resources that we have.
I'd just like to praise Heritage Fund. They've provided some funding for cohort groups, which they then grouped groups together who have had funding from them. I've been leading one of those groups, and it was great because it provided them with a safe, secure space, them to talk, ask questions, build up confidence, and just understand things. So, you know, I think that sort of approach of you know, continuing to help groups, particularly if they go through a difficult time over the next year, I think is going to be something which is well spent, and I suspect is going to help the well-being of quite a few people who were very, very stressed. And you know, that the opportunity within a confined group to talk to each other, share experiences, and even mentor each other was and is a really powerful tool. So, you know, it's not direct money to the group, but it is a way of helping, which I think is important.
Graham, I think you've got a question you wanted to ask. If you could unmute yourself.
Yep, sorry. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. It was actually our secretary of our group that passed on the link for me to join this call this morning. Just really to say thank you. It's been it's certainly been very interesting to see more projects going on elsewhere in the country and how people have survived really what's happened in COVID. Our project right now, I mean, we're 7 years down the road, and it's fledgling because we have the complication. It's a historic building. It's a James Gillespie Graham building, and we're still trying to get it off the owner before it falls down. But what we have experienced during COVID is it's really just it's in a good area for walking. There's a lot of people out horse riding, things like that, which is quite unusual for our area, really. But it's brought it a lot more interest. Now, our idea is we're long term, we want to use the building to kind of re-enhance interest in our town again, because the whole place, the surrounding areas of it have got history going back thousands of years, but it's practically untouched because we had a steelworks right next to it. All the emphasis went in that, and it's, you know, everything else get forgotten. So really, it's interesting. I like the projects like this. I wanted to come on it when I saw High Street, because we have a project up here in Banff, on the north coast of Scotland, and they had a massively successful recovery. They were decimated by the fishing industry in the previous round with Europe. They lost all of that, but they actually recovered it as a community and have brought their town back as a tourist venue more than anything else. But I mean, it took them a decade, but they've taken old buildings like their old fishing net store, things like that. That was converted into accommodation. They took the caravan site off the council, totally re-renovated that, and they've got people turn up every year. Thank you, Vicky. I will. They've got people turn up every year to come to this event. They've got direct links with Norway, I think, but the chaps actually come over. It's just, you know, it's all to do with fishing from hundreds of years ago, but they have a fantastic festival up there every year as well. But all of that was on the verge of destruction, and they saved it. And this is possible in every single historic town in the country. So really, this is what we're chasing after as well. We're at the stage of, once we know we can get the building, we're going to be chasing funding. So, and we're all volunteers, so we haven't had to deal with the battles that a lot of people you have right now that are dependent on funding to survive. So, you know, we're in a more comfortable position than them. But certainly, you know, so something like this is useful for us regardless. So just thanks for having me.
That's great to know. Thank you, Graham. What organisation is it? Or
it's Friends of Cambusnethan Priory, and
right.
you can see it on Facebook. Got its own web page as well, and we're on Twitter and all the other good things that are out there. But it's in a beautiful location. The history of the place is incredible. The building itself is only 200 years old, 202, but there have been 3 previous buildings on the same site. The previous building burned down. It was 400 years old, and then before that was a medieval keep called Baird's Tower, and we've got reason to believe there was an ancient monastery there before that. But the whole area, there's Iron Age, Bronze Age, Romans. We've got metal detector guys down there. They find stuff all the time. We're trying to bring it all together so there's something people can really go and see and get a feel for. And in return, you know, like everybody's been saying this morning, if you can get people in for these things, you're going to get them back into your town. You're going to get tourists back into your town. And there is a whole regeneration thing. And I think COVID, in one respect, has been an opportunity for people to kind of reflect and go, you know, really, we've been going in the wrong direction for far too long, and we really need to focus on our communities, rebuild them, and, you know, really just get the heart back into life again. Because it's just people have been chasing, I don't know, careers and money for far too long instead of the things that really make our lives richer. So
You're right.
I think COVID's maybe been a lesson. I don't know. But
yeah.
Anyway, stop rabbiting. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Have you been in touch with our Scotland Development Officer, Sarah Pearce?
Yes.
Oh, you have? Oh, brilliant. I'll send you a detail.
Yeah, no, we were actually up at the engine shed in Stirling
right.
a couple of years ago for the event up there, and that's where we got in touch with the project in Banff and the Ridge project in Dunbar. That's a fantastic one to look. That's a real.
It is.
That's a real winner for me. It's won many awards already and incredibly well deserved. I mean, to turn to a father and son's lives round like that is phenomenal.
Yeah, it is brilliant.
You know, it's real inspiration for anybody that reads it.
It is. Thanks,
Okay,
thanks, Graham. We've just got another couple of questions.
I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you. A question for Owen. No, sorry, a question for Anne. Heritage building projects in town centres will often inevitably involve high capital costs, with conservation not such a high priority compared to, say, skills development and growing employment. Could you say a bit more about the balance you would be looking for between capital and revenue in bids, please? I can read that again if you need me to.
That's it, I've got that question.
All right.
Thanks for that question. I think it's a really important point, actually, because I don't think what we're saying in terms of prioritising certain outcomes is not so much that you can't any longer do those sort of capital heavy heritage building restoration projects per se. It's more about what the end outcome is and how that contributes to that set of 6 priority outcomes I was talking about. So I think absolutely we're still expecting to see you know, the sorts of projects that I highlighted on the presentation, you know, the examples where you are really going to town on historic buildings or townscapes or whatever it is. But we're asking people to think about how that then has an impact on in how you can use that to develop skills, what impact it has on the local area in terms of making it a better place to live, work or visit. So it's about how you frame your project, I think, and how you explain that, those potential outcomes that will flow from it. And I think in terms of revenue costs, I mean, there's always a balance. And if you've got a largely capital project, inevitably, the balance of cost is going to be more heavily weighted towards the capital side than the revenue. But I think with the revenue side, what we really want to do is to get people to think about how they're broadening the audiences that they're reaching. You know, who do you reach now? Who's missing? You know, is there a particular target audience that you think would be useful to engage in that project? So it's that sort of thinking. It's not. You know, I think many of the projects we will support will look to some degree like the ones we've always supported, but it's just how you frame them that's important and who you're really targeting as a result. I hope that's helpful.
Great advice, great advice, Anne, thank you. Question for Owen from Damien. Damien says it's slightly off the topic of funding. However, does Historic England have an opinion on the recent permitted development proposal changes to boost high street uses and the potential impact on conservation areas and current designated has?
Oh, wonderful. A question about planning reform. There's no way I can get into trouble. Yes, we are in discussion with MHCLG, as others that are involved in the planning process are, with regards to all features of planning reform, and including permitted development rights, which are essentially allow people to change buildings easier without going through the planning process, and where that can be done. Now, I'm going to try and phrase things in a way that might not get me into any trouble with either HE colleagues or MHCLG.
Shall I turn the recording off?
No, don't worry. There are enough people listening for that not to be an issue. The important issue is the importance is how do you manage change, and how do you manage the impact on the wider place. Now, whilst there is a pressing need for places to change, and in high streets in particular, those places do need to adapt, and we must make sure that the existing processes, i.e. the planning system, does not restrict that change. It is important that that change is positive and the impact of that change is properly understood. There is Create Streets, the organisation from one of our commissioners, Nicholas Boyd-Smith, who's also heavily involved in a lot of planning reform, have produced recently quite an interesting piece of work about change from retail to residential on high streets, and the importance of quality and the potential impact of poor conversions. And I've certainly seen a few in my time, and I'm sure many others, and the impact of those kind of poor conversions can have on on the wider place, on how people perceive the wider place. And there's also the added feature that, you know, as you take more retail out and put in more residential, there will come a tipping point of when the critical mass of attractors to that high street is crossed, and that high street gets less and less viable because there's lesser reason for people to visit. And all these factors do need to be considered when managing that change. And we are in the process. We continue to talk productively with MHCLG on how best to balance the need for change with the need to make sure that change is positive and managed.
Very well worded, Owen.
I just want to congratulate you, Owen, on the tightrope you just walked. I think it is an issue, though. I think that we're all seeing, you know, as we all talk about high streets, particularly the post retail. What are they? Yeah, I do think it is important to remember it does need to change, but it needs to change in a considered and conscious way. And I think that is probably something, hopefully, that everyone will agree with. I wanted to pick up, I'm just having a look through some of the other questions. I wanted to pick up on one of the questions, Vicky, because I noticed Vicky Dawson had her hand raised as well earlier, so I wanted to make sure we got to her question. The question was about tips for bringing people and organizations together around a shared vision, and the challenges that COVID has brought to that. I know that's something we've noticed a lot. We fund quite a lot of number of projects in our project viability grants and in our project development grants, where we're funding kind of community engagement. And I guess, you know, community engagement for us is quite a broad concept, but it can absolutely mean trying to build those critical partnerships that Mick and Anne mentioned as really important going forward. You know, trying to find the genuine, you know, community use that is needed. What is the local community need? What do they want? And when you start to kind of engage with the community, that's when these ideas kind of come up, and you can, you know, these partnerships begin to spark, and then you can kind of try to capture that. It inevitably, COVID has made that more challenging, because it's just a lot harder to actually engage people like this than actually in the room all together. We are very keen to make sure that if people haven't been able to do that in a way they find satisfying, that we're kind of trying to extend grants and things like that to enable that to happen in a post-COVID way. But I know some other groups have been really creative about community engagement and partnership building digitally. So I wondered if anybody had any tips there.
Just a couple of quick ones. Obviously, something they could do is do a neighbourhood plan. You have to do lots of those meetings, bringing the community together there, but I appreciate it's not right for everybody. But there are some useful tools, actually. If you look at the link I put in the presentation to the neighbourhood plan section, there are examples in there. Similarly, other ways of getting people together, but on a lighter side, are doing things like theory change models, which kind of helps the community come together and then see something in a simpler form. Again, there's lots of templates around that. Planning for real exercises involving the planners and all sorts is an old hat thing to do, but I still think a good thing to do. It's very tactile, nice way of, you know, sort of moving things around and so forth. And there are organisations such as community organisers who have a whole range of tools around this. And again, if you look on the website, you'll see a lot of information. So yeah, there's lots and lots. I could go on for ages about this. There's lots of things. Just Google.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mick. I just wanted to pick up on this question from Noreen that looks really interesting, and it's for all the panel. She's asking, what can you do to persuade a local authority to lead when there's more than one? She's talking about working with multiple local authorities on funding bids and getting one to be the lead funder. What can you do to persuade a local authority to lead? We have 3 local authorities across the high street in Crystal Palace in South East London, if anyone has any tips.
I'm just thinking, gosh, that's hard, and looking at everyone else's faces and seeing they're also thinking, gosh, that's hard.
It could be an event in itself.
Well, I'll have a go.
Go on, Evan.
I don't think there is. I don't think there are any hard and fast rules, but it's a case of identifying contacts with each of those three local authorities and productive relationships with each of those three local authorities. I'm guessing that they won't all be equally engaged, and therefore it's identifying the one where there is potential for the level of engagement and also for the level of buy-in. And Graham is entirely right. Local councillors is key. Because whilst engaging with, whilst you might find an office, a local authority officer that's interested and wishes to work with you, that does need sufficient buy-in within the authority to kind of make that engagement real. And local councillors are very important in making that happen. And so actually engaging with officers and councillors and seeing where the phone is being picked up or the emails are being answered, and just trying to persuade. Not a very good answer, is it?
I guess I would pick up a bit further, yes, on that as well, and just say we know that in all of these projects, leadership is absolutely essential. Leadership, within your project, but also finding, yes, as Owen was saying, finding who can be your kind of champion and kind of push it in the local authority has to be key. And if you can find one person in one of them, they can approach the others as a kind of peer, and that might be helpful. But that does sound like challenging geography. So much sympathy there.
We have a kind of two towers situation going on right now here. On one side, you have the council who have a whole project going, regenerating the local area, regenerating the land where the former steelworks was, to take in local outdoor areas. We have an area of very important historical interest, apart from our own. The unfortunate thing is, while all that seemed to be going on, there's also another project to bring a rail freight terminal in and put it right in the middle of that area that is supposed to be an urban village. So it's flying in the face of it. Now, we have a number of councils on the community side, councillors on the community side, who are very keen to see all the community projects going on. There's us. We have one with a thing called a pump track. I don't know if any of you heard of that, but basically it's a kind of, it's a bike track that the kids can take, skateboard, scooters, whatever, but it's quite a remarkable thing to see. It's good fun. But they're actually promoting this model now out to other towns, and the chap who developed it here, he actually hosted the Red Bull European finals there. So it's something else to bring things in. But we've got a local councillor who's promoting that. She's working with another group here called Campfire History, who take people out into the woods, and you go for a walk, see all the historical sites there. Then at the end, set a camp up, light a fire. Everybody's a cup of tea and coffee around the fire. But it's actually been proven. We've had a number of people. It's actually brought them off, antidepressants and things. Just because, and they've said 3 years of therapy and pills. They went down the woods for 2 afternoons and they're off the pills. This is the thing, but all these projects can do that. You give people an experience, a nice environment. It can help. But what we're finding is the council seems to be on a mission to get hold of every single square foot of land they can find and put houses on it, put something on it where they're going to get revenue back. And they don't care if they hurt something that's a historical value. So this is where we've got this two-tier thing going on, and we need to find out which councillors are on our side and which ones are just doing it for the money and they're going to build houses everywhere. Because we actually have a lot of historical sites around here that are in real danger. So that's just really ties in with the point about finding councillors who have empathy for projects like ours and ones who it's just a job. I hope that makes sense.
I don't think you're alone there, Graham.
Yeah.
I think other people will be going through the same thing. We're just over time now. We're just gone a minute over. Is there anything else anyone else wants to ask before we go, before I wrap up, or anything that the panelists want to say? Nope. Okay, I'll go ahead and thank everyone so much for attending. It's been a really fascinating morning. Thank you so much to the panelists. Of course, without you, it wouldn't have been an event. The next Open High Streets event is planned to be the 1st of July, and we're hoping that it will be in Coventry, all being well. So watch this space. Everyone who booked and said that they were happy for the Heritage Trust Network to keep in touch, we'll be sending you out details of events coming up. You'll also receive an email from me with the slides, with a webinar link to watch the video if you want to, and with a very short survey. So please, please, if you could fill in that survey, it would be fantastic. But for now, it's bye from us. Thank you for attending.